The committee consists of 18 independent experts, and these 18 independent experts are usually either law professors or representatives of disabled persons organizations or judges. What we do is we review state party reports as part of the monitoring process of the CRPD convention. And state parties have to declare or explain in these state party reports on how they try to implement the right to independent living and living in the community, for instance, for disabled people, or the right to inclusive education for disabled children as well as disabled adults, and so forth. One of the innovations of the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, is that it has a national monitoring mechanism. So that means that governments have to appoint a focal point and also an independent national monitoring mechanism back home, which is usually a National Human Rights Institute. And this national monitoring process complements our international monitoring, and that is what we rely very heavily on. What can we do if governments don't comply? And they most often don't comply. I mean, human rights violations go on because governments don't comply. And I think civil society is one of the most important factors or most important stakeholders when it comes to implementing human rights. What they do is what we call mobilization of shame, and by involving the media and many other non-governmental actors, state parties do comply if the protest is, let's say, sufficient enough or also smart enough. I think one of the biggest successes of the CRPD is that it has brought the human rights model of disability to the light, and that has replaced what we call the medical model of disability. And the medical model of disability basically reduces people with disabilities to their impairment. You only see their impairment. And because of that impairment, lots of rights can be denied to you because of that impairment. You are perceived to be different, and that has been legitimization of denying or restricting rights in the past. And the CRPD says this is not possible anymore. It says we have to take a different view on disability and see disabled people as human rights subjects. And the human rights model of disability says that disabled people cannot be denied any human right based on their impairment, may it be the right to marry, the right to sign a contract, the right to vote, and all these rights are denied to many people with disabilities even today in most countries if they have, for instance, an intellectual disability or what we call a psychosocial disability. And the CRPD says this is not possible anymore because it is this form of discrimination. And the CRPD also says that in order to make equality real, we have to adopt what we call an inclusive equality model. And that is based on 4 dimensions. One is to take into account also the socio-economic disadvantage of many disabled people, but maybe also other people. Secondly, to strongly condemn stigmatization, violence, discrimination. The third is taking into account that disabled people are part of a social group, so you need to also take into account, take a group-based approach to equality, which sometimes means that you need to implement policies which are group-oriented. Accessibility is a very good example for that. You need to have a policy in place which makes it clear that not only people in wheelchairs can get everywhere at any time, but also blind people, but also people who have other kind of impairments. But that is a kind of a group approach, because you need to have regulations in place which say this is what is the minimum requirement for accessibility for the blind, for the deaf, and so on. And the fourth dimension is they're taking into account the human dignity of each and every person, and that means also taking into account autonomous decisions and choices and making room for that. It is a very theoretical approach, and I think if we would apply it to concrete examples like the right to inclusive education, then it would become more clear what that means, but it would probably take another interview to explain all that. While of course there's always room for improvement, the first 10 years of the CRPD have been very successful. Many laws have been changed worldwide in making the environment and the information and technology system more accessible. There's also room for improvement, but I think it is amazing to see how fast we have come to this point.